I believe that as a man, I should pay for the first date. I believe I should open the car door. I believe I should protect for her, provide for her. I believe if she's my woman, she should be able to come to me with her problems and I should fix them. That makes me a sexist and a horrible person. Fine.
It doesn't.
You agree with the baseline. Everyone agrees with the foundations of what I say, but when I build on top of it, they try and pretend it's sexist. By extension, if I have responsibility over her, then I must have a degree of authority. For the same reason, if I have responsibility over, and everyone's going to lose their mind, it's an example, it's only an analogy. If I have responsibility over a child, I have to have some authority. You cannot be responsible for something that doesn't listen to you. You can't be responsible for a dog if it doesn't obey you, or a child if it doesn't obey you, or a woman doesn't obey you.
The super sexist path.
Cool. Let's take a beautiful sports car. It doesn't matter. A house,
yeah,
land,
didn't help.
Whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever I'm responsible for,
object.
I have to have a degree of authority over.
You get to a point, I would think, where there's mutual respect. So there isn't like the authority. It's a give and take on a healthy relationship.
Correct. A healthy relationship has mutual respect. So in a healthy relationship, the man will say X and the woman will say, yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I won't do it. I'm not saying it has to be a command orders. I'm not saying that.
In the past 70 years, women have made massive strides in attaining human rights and autonomy. This has, in turn, greatly affected society as it has shifted to become more egalitarian. For example, the right to own a bank account, to own property, to work a job, to terminate unwanted pregnancies, and to initiate no-fault divorces has given women freedom from survival marriages, wherein there was no choice but to depend on a man for access to food, education, money, and housing. This has affected men in that women no longer have to settle and abide by negative behavior in order to survive, and that women are beginning to impact and influence more than just the domestic sphere. The domestic sphere refers to the division of labor that occurred for primarily middle-class and white families during industrialization, wherein bioessentialist views regarding what men and women were best suited for led to the strict division of the sexes. Women were considered to be best suited for the home and church. What was considered the ideals for womanhood were centered around restraining women from politics, academia, and the workforce. Women were expected to uphold these values of stability and morality by offering her husband a refuge from the highly competitive and unstable realms of politics and industry, in which men were expected to be materialistic, aggressive, and vulgar. Women, in turn, were viewed as being a complement to leisure, nice to have around, and a status symbol, but with many of the necessary household duties she had fulfilled pre-industrialization having been replaced via the expanding market, somewhat unnecessary. The cult of domesticity was what propagated these beliefs through gender roles and societal expectations. The cult of domesticity, as defined in my current History of Women course, developed as a family and lost its function as an economic unit, broke links between family and community, and established that family is private and self-contained, marked the emergence of a market economy that led to the devaluation of women's work, identified the home as a haven in a heartless world, a refuge from the competitive, unstable, immoral world of work, held male values of materialism, aggression, hardness, and rationality, held female values of kindness, lovingness, humanism, and gentleness, defined the world of work and public life as male, and defined the world of home as female. It was believed that men and women were inherently different, as based on God's will and biological differences. The devaluation of women's work occurred simultaneously with the Industrial Revolution as well as scientific advancements of the time. Common beliefs of women's inherent inferiority included that women are physically smaller than men, that women had less physical stamina than men because of increased fainting spells and other ailments, that women menstruated. Women were viewed as both a product and the prisoner of the reproductive system, wherein the uterus and ovaries provided the basis for both her behavior and social role. Women were less intelligent, as they had smaller brains than men. Of course, it was ignored that the clothing of the time was heavily restrictive and unhealthy, and that the beauty standards and gender roles discouraged exercise in women. Women's poor health was viewed as being related to reproduction above all else, turning any pain into a woman's ailment instead of a result of poor diet, exercise, or environment. Markers of intelligence were altered to better reflect the view of gendered intelligence and were often based on pseudoscience like phrenology, the reading of the shape of the skull for insight on the mind. When scientists developed ratios based on the size of the brain to body weight, they discovered that female brain size to female body weight yielded a higher ratio than male brain size to male body weight, and changed the correlation in related brain weight to body height. Although these claims have been disproven and often directly related to the patriarchal influence on every aspect of female life, these views are often still held today as a means of supporting misogynistic ideals and resisting the female shift out of the domestic sphere. In many fields, we have begun to outperform men. The Harvard Business Review points out that women outperform men in most leadership skills. Women outperform men in STEM as well as consistently in general academia. We are taking up more space in business, in law, and in the workforce. In turn, society itself has changed, not to accommodate us, but because women have forcibly taken a piece of the pie, even though many of the social structures that have kept women to the domestic sphere are still in play. Figures like Andrew Tate play on the insecurities that accompany this paradigm shift. Andrew Tate is an active participant of what internet denizens refer to as the Manosphere, a collection of websites, blogs, and online forums promoting masculinity, misogyny, and opposition to feminism. These include groups like incels, men's rights activists, pickup artists, and fathers' rights groups.
For today's trip into the Manosphere, we're going to find out what's the maximum body count you'll tolerate. There's a lot of zeros in the answers, and I think there's going to be a lot of disappointed men. So Nathan down here says, you can never know, since she's going to lie about it. You think it's 3, but in reality, she's had 13 guys. Some of these men have given it a lot of thought. Actual relationship, less than 10 men or women combined if she's bi. That's usually the point of no return for most women. If she's bi, it's def more than 10. Depends on age. I'll accept 1 high school sweetheart, 1 college sweetheart, and 1 other guy for the rest of time before me. I think some of these men might be overestimating how many options they're going to have. We got this guy really keeping it classy. 0. There is nothing more satisfying than having to tell her to be careful with her teeth. Few will understand. I think if the day comes that any of these men actually meet a woman, they're going to be in for a world of disappointment.
According to a 2020 report, the Manosphere has affected how young people view feminism and women's rights. This report showed that 50% of young men between the ages of 16 and 24 believe that feminism makes it harder for men to succeed. Over the past year, he has become a household name as teachers and parents became aware of his popularity with young boys, as well as the content he produces. Tate self-describes himself as a misogynist and produces content around such views as women are men's property, assaulting women for cheating is okay, and how men should date women who are 18 or 19 rather than women in their mid-20s because they can make an imprint on them. This type of resistance should come as no surprise. Whenever a wave of feminism enacts visible change, there is pushback. As Simone de Beauvoir so aptly put it, never forget that it only takes one political, economic, or religious crisis for women's rights to be put in jeopardy. Those rights are never again to be taken for granted. You must remain vigilant throughout your life. In 1991, Susan Faludi argued that a backlash against women's rights is nothing new in American history. Indeed, it is a recurring phenomenon. It returns every time women begin to make some headway towards equality, a seemingly inevitable early frost to the culture's brief flowerings of feminism. Perhaps the most obvious example of this quote in action is the overturning of Roe v. Wade. A less overt example can be found in the employment losses during the pandemic, where the majority of those who left the workforce were female, many of which voluntarily left as a result of lack of childcare. What sets this wave of backlash apart from previous waves, however, is the branding of said backlash as being feminist in nature, through the use of careful wording which turns being a housewife reliant on her husband into being in tune with the divine feminine, or sexual exploitation into sexual empowerment because sex work is work.
This girl was saying stop glorifying sex work.
Why?
I don't know. What's wrong with you? Girl, I've worked 5 months this year, and I don't have to work again this year unless I want to. I will. Fucking love money. It's great. Nobody tells me what to do. Get you some money. Get you some money. Get you some happiness.
Separation between liberal and conservative talking points is often set dressing and little else. Still, it comes as a shock that so many support the more blatantly misogynistic representation of these traditional ideas, namely that women are meant to be subservient and sexually available to men. While leftist ideology is still harmful to women, the type of rhetoric actors like Andrew Tate believe in is the same type of thinking which spurns on violence against women, which has been steadily increasing over the past 10 years. Faludi has written extensively on this concept of backlash. She writes, "Backlash politics may be defined as the reaction by groups which are declining in a felt sense of importance, influence, and power. If backlash is basically seen as an elementary pattern of stimulus and counter-reaction, Libset/Rab's definition develops the reacting side, highlighting groups and their reasons or motivations. Their impression, accurate or not, that their status is being reduced. Further specifying within her feminist frame, Faludi elaborates the reason or motivation as an anti-feminist reaction to feminist gains, reaction to women's progress, the specific efforts of contemporary women to improve their status, efforts that have been interpreted time and again by men, especially men grappling with real threats to their economic and social well-being on other fronts, as spelling their own masculine doom. This, in addition, tries to define a special point in time for both poles. Faludi further underlines that the feminist gains may be small, but are experienced as threatening. The anti-feminist backlash has been set off not by women's achievement of full equality, but by the increased possibility that they might win it. Here it also becomes clear that Faludi's central feminist aim is full equality, full human rights, nothing more nor less. Yet many men will feel threatened, and even more so under difficult conditions in times of crisis, when they might make feminism the scapegoat. They may perceive themselves as social outcasts rather than guardians of the status quo. Then they are not so much defending a prevailing order as resurrecting an outmoded or imagined one. The circumstance that backlashes usually start as preemptive strikes also has the consequence of dividing women, because the happy few who already enjoy gains will react differently from those left behind. In other words, though we still have a long way to go, that we have made progress at all has impacted the daily lives of men around the globe, and, quite simply, they don't like that. Andrew Tate and others like him provide a mouthpiece for those feelings of discontent, particularly in younger boys who do not feel like oppressors, but instead feel all the vulnerability and discomfort of growing up and all that entails. This feeling is known as aggrieved entitlement, a term coined by Michael Kimmel, who refers to the idea that over the course of the past 20 to 30 years, the world has changed in a way that has centered primarily young white men, and they've moved from the center of society to the margins of society. This feeling is not uncommon and has persisted throughout all waves of feminism. But the impact of social media has made it easier for the actively violent and blatantly antisocial rhetoric Tate uses to spread far more easily due to the easy and private access the internet affords. As Robert Lawson, an associate professor in sociolinguistics, points out, a lot of what Tate is saying is in some sense actually not new. It is a rearticulation of a crisis of masculinity discourse that we see back in the 70s, back in the 1980s, through the Moons movement led by people like Robert Bly and so on, where there was a sense of reconnecting with your own masculinity as a way of fixing the world. He's only another entry in a long line of other men who have done something similar. This allows for the feeling of prosecution and victimization to spread, despite the fact that many of the arguments used to support the concept of male injustice being easily debunked. For example, the argument that the #MeToo movement has led to a rise of false accusations of rape against men. This argument makes little sense considering that men are more likely to be raped than to be falsely accused of rape, that false accusations are prosecuted and penalized, and that many more rapes or sexual assaults may go unreported. Some suggest that only 8 to 10% of women report the rapes to the police, leaving at least 90% of rapes unreported. While an estimated 2 to 8% of their sexual assaults or rapes are falsely reported, this number only affects the number of reported rapes. Therefore, the number of false reports in comparison to the total number of sexual assaults and rapes is likely closer to 0.002 to 0.008%. Many argue that feminism is to blame for creating figures like Andrew Tate.
What do you mean
Don't leave. Women leave 70% of the time. If they're college educated, they leave 90% of the time.
Correct.
Women ruin relationships and they ruin families.
Women leave.
Women typically do it.
Actually,
and so if a guy
if a man
ask the majority of men, their first choice is not a baby mother.
Mama.
Just like our first choice typically is not a short, broke guy.
That's right.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Now, will we put up with a guy that's shorter if he's good looking? Sure. Will a guy put up with a single mother if she has some other things that she brings to the table? Maybe she's attractive. Maybe she has other stuff. Maybe she's submissive. Whatever it is that he values. Yeah, but it's most men. It is not their first choice.
Okay.
To argue so is to ignore that men are victims of patriarchal masculinity, which disconnects them from their emotions and socializes them into a violence in a manner more like a gun's recoil, hurting the hand that holds it, than the more direct impact that women feel as a target of patriarchy. However, a lesser examined aspect of this is the impact of higher income inequality and class differences that fuel nostalgia about what many view to be as pre-feminist good old days. The middle class, once the economic stratum of a clear majority of American adults, has steadily contracted in the past 5 decades. The share of adults who live in middle-class households fell from 61% in 1971 to 50% in 2021, according to a new Pew Research Center analysis of governmental data. Household incomes have risen considerably since 1970, but those of middle-class households have not climbed nearly as much as those of upper-income households. The share of aggregate U.S. household income held by the middle class has fallen steadily since 1970. There's a sizable and growing income gap between adults with a bachelor's degree and those with lower levels of education. In addition, home prices have rapidly increased over the past 5 decades, eclipsing the inflation rate by 150% since 1970. In fact, if home prices grew at the same rate as inflation since 1970, the median home price today would be just $177,000 rather than $400,000. This makes it difficult to achieve the sort of lifestyle the middle class held in previous generations. Although correlated with the confinement of women to the domestic sphere, much of what is presented as the traditional good old days are also experiences that only the middle and upper class were able to experience. The days that these people are nostalgic for are defined by wealth and race as much as, if not more so, by gender roles. This is true even of women who romanticize pre-feminism while often referring to fantasies of what their childhood would be like if they had instead been raised by a stay-at-home mother, often including experiences like horseback riding classes or piano, or take on a romanticization of homemaking, such as what is presented by the cottagecore aesthetic like pretty dresses and baking. This lens ignores the reality of what middle-class and poverty-stricken lives were like for most women. Some suggest a need for role models for boys to offer alternatives to the misogyny made mainstream by those in the Manosphere. The issue stems in that what are considered positive qualities exist in both men and women. In order to present masculinity as a concept, there must be an opposite in femininity. Suggesting that men need more role models, as Victoria Smith argues, and boys don't need role models, girls do, is merely a watered-down version of the same misogyny. What boys need more role models really means is women and girls should be restricted in what they can say and do, what they are for, so that men and boys can feel exceptional, not as humans, but as males. As Martha Gill writes in The Guardian, men do not, in fact, lack for role models. They have entire libraries, film archives, and the leaders of almost every country and profession. The real question is, why do boys choose Andrew Tate as a role model instead of the myriad of other men who have achieved far greater things? Misogyny is comfortable. Men and boys feel entitled to the benefits that female oppression provides them, particularly in the wake of increased awareness of oppression via class and race. When girls prove that they are worthy of the rights for which earlier feminists fought, this becomes evidence that masculinity is under threat. And, in a sense, this is true. Feminism does take away rights from men, the right to oppress women. To address inequality, the oppressors must give up some of their power, and the discomfort of change has to be weathered until it becomes normalized. Part of this may be mitigated by improvement in other areas. The United States still has a long way to go for racial and class equality, which many may ignore in lieu of blaming feminism for the dismal state of their lives. In other ways, it may be unavoidable. Social media is meant to be addicting, and when figures like Tate are willing to be so vocal about oppressor discontent, it's easily spread. To combat this, women do not need to make themselves smaller or to hide their abilities to cater to male ego. When girls outperform boys in exams, this is treated not as proof of the enormous injustice of female exclusion from education, but as a kind of theft. When women earn enough money to be self-sufficient, they are robbing men of the breadwinner role. When they prove themselves capable of managing their reproductive choices in the family unit, they are reducing men to sperm donors. You can dismiss this as MRA paranoia, but the truth is, women are doing this. They are dismantling the shaky foundations of masculinity by revealing the enormous overlap between male and female desires and capabilities. Men can deny this and use violence to enforce their denial, but women will still retain the same potential, even if it is not permitted to flourish. Until men can accept that they are not more unique, more interesting, and more quintessentially human than women, then they will not be happy. Until men can accept this, because they know it anyways, they will not stop hurting us. As Flora Tristan puts it, the most oppressed man finds a being to oppress, his wife. She is the proletarian of the proletarian. Now that women is no longer restricted to wifedom, man has to find a new punching bag. Figures like Andrew Tate are the ensuing temper tantrum, the growing pains of equality, and the way to address them is not by further coddling them or ceding aspects of women's liberation to make them more comfortable. Instead, we must discourage misogynistic behavior and actions and make it clear that behavior like this is unacceptable, instead of implicitly agreeing with and supporting it. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I'm still recording this with toothache, so apologies for any difficulties in understanding me. I'm a bit late with the Andrew Tate thing because, and I know I kind of talked around what he actually did. It's more so the rhetoric and what he represents that I talked on today. But I'd rather just wait until he actually gets to a trial and we can have all the evidence and all the data and everything just laid out perfectly instead of having to make, here's the thing pre-trial, here's the thing mid-trial, etc. It'll probably be a minute before we get, to that point. But I do think it's important to point out that Andrew Tate is no mistake. He is there because men want him to be there. He makes money because men want to be like him. And it's a complicated problem, but it's not one that can be solved, as some people suggest, by dismantling feminism. Because a lot of people suggest that he is the result of feminism going too far. It's frustrating to hear, it's frustrating to deal with, but alas, it's nothing new. If any comments, questions, or concerns, leave them down below. And, if you have any suggestions, etc., want to go to the buy me a coffee or whatever, do that. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.